What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the quarantine zone again, and this time we got Bobby of Fates Warning. Thank you for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
No problem. Good to talk with you, Alex.
Yep, great to talk with you as well. We have the brand new Fates Warning album, Long Day, Good Night, scheduled to come out this coming November. Was the intention of this album to just make a direct continuation of Theories of Flight, or do you think that this is almost kind of like a new beginning in a way for Fates Warning?
I think it's just a new record. Just looking at it like a separate thing. I don't think there was that much of a intention to do things a certain way. Theories of Flight obviously had a theme running through it of home and moving around and sort of, I guess, the story of Jim's life and having multiple homes and that sort of thing. But it is kind of funny that there are a couple of songs that reference, going back home, and on this record, the same sort of subject. But I think that's mainly because of Ray not being, he's living in Spain now, and I think that there's sort of the underlying theme for him of wanting to be back home at times, missing home, that sort of thing. So it might sound like that there's a continuation, but there wasn't really conscious attempt to, continue on with it.
Okay.
I don't think.
Do you feel that maybe the two singles that you released so far, Now Comes the Rain and Scars, could serve as like a clear representation of what the whole Fates Warning album is going to sound like? Or is that just the tip of the iceberg, being that the music I consider to be very experimental already?
Well, it's when the record label gets the record and they listen to it, Metal Blade listen to it. Obviously, there's a little bit of talk about, what do we want to pre-release before the record comes out, and those conversations go with Jim Matthias and various people how to present the record to people and how to give them a little bit of a taste of it before it comes out. The record is long. The record is like over 70 minutes long, and so. If you're asking that question, I assume that you don't think it's a representation of what the whole record is.
No.
But the record is sort of varied in the way that there's some stuff that's on the record that's heavy, but a little maybe more straight. Little quirky riffs here and there. There's some stuff that's a little more, I wouldn't say mellow, but that's just kind of like, like just good songs. And then there's about 3 songs that are really sort of out there, progressive. And so the record is varied, I would say, just based upon, the song and what you're listening to. And I don't think you can listen to one song on this record and say, that's exactly what the whole record is about, because it does have some varying degrees of difficulty or progressiveness or whatever you want to call it, depending on what song you're tuning into at the time. And I think that is maybe a little bit of can be a little bit of a concern when people hear one song and they say, "Well, I like the first one better," or I like this one a lot better than the first one, whatever. Since 2 songs were released so far, but hopefully people will get to hear the whole record and hear and hear all the the different things that are happening on it, because it's a great record and there's a lot of cool things happening musically and lyric wise and melody wise. So just hope that people give it a chance and listen to the whole record.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys have been on a great momentum lately, like, especially, when you came into the band and we got the gift of Darkness in a Different Light, and then, the momentum was carried further in Theories of Flight, and then, we get into Long Day, Good Night. I don't know if there's like maybe like a hidden poem in the past catalog a little bit there, but what I wanted to know is when you joined up with Fates Warning, were you kind of like looking at the earlier work, being like, okay, this is how I have to play, this is what, the sound is all about, or being that you played with so many reputable artists before, you were kind of allowed to bring a little bit of your own mix into Fates Warning?
Well, I started with the band in 2007, and of course, we toured just pretty much Europe at that point for years, up until when we did Darkness in a Different Light, which I'm guessing is right around 2013. So I was with the band for a while, but before we ever even started recording anything, which was kind of strange when you really look back on it, that we hadn't done a record for all those years that I was with the band after I joined. But when I started to learn the material, of course, I'm playing a bunch of stuff that I've never played before. So I'm learning a lot of Mark Zonder and a lot of Steve Zimmerman drumming parts and stuff. And it's weird because there's some places that I think I take a lot of liberties in doing my sort of thing. When I listen back to the parts, when I listen to everything, I listen back through the songs, and sometimes I think I stay really close to it. And if the part's really identifiable, I'll stay close to it, and try and create that. And sometimes if this part, if Mark Zonder is doing something that I feel is a little more soloing and a little bit more his style, sometimes I would deviate from that and kind of do my own thing. So it would vary a little bit depending on the part and the song. Sometimes I listen back to what if right before a tour starts, I'll go through the songs, a little bit and kind of brush up on things, and then I'll listen to the original recording that was released in the 80s, by the guys, or the 90s or whatever, and I'm like, wow, I really went different than what Mark was playing, and sometimes I'll forget, what the original part was. So it is kind of strange how at different points, I think, depending on whatever song, and when I did learn the song before working with the band for a tour or whatever, sometimes I changed things quite a bit or somewhat, and then sometimes I don't change things at all. But one thing that's cool for me is being that we did the live record in Europe, live in Europe last year, a couple of years ago. People were able to, that had never seen us on tour, were able to actually hear me play those songs and hear those versions that the band had been playing for the last 13 years since I've been with the band. So I think it's good for people to hear those songs and how they evolved a little bit and hear the way the band's playing the songs today. I mean, it was sort of the same thing when I joined Halford, and I did the live record with Halford after we did Resurrection in 2000. We did a live record called Live Insurrection, and I was able to play those Judas Priest songs, and the band was playing those old classics, and hearing the way that band played the songs live, people actually got to hear that if they didn't go to the shows. If you're a younger fan, or if you're from a country that just, the band never visited, or that sort of thing. So I think having those live records, it makes it cooler for me, and I just kind of go with it.
Definitely. That led me perfectly into my next question, because being such a prolific artist, playing with many different bands such as Halford and Riot, and also playing with Sebastian Bach, like, is there a different mind frame depending on the project that you are working with, or is there maybe like a usual method behind the madness that like applies to everything?
I think because I grew up doing a little bit of everything, a little bit of, like being in, maybe if you want to say being in cover bands or um, whatever when I was growing up, and being influenced by heavy metal, also being influenced by really progressive music, and then it even goes, for me personally, it even goes completely to the other extreme of playing country music, which I play a lot of country music, living in Texas, and that sort of thing. And I don't know, some people get turned off when I say that about playing country music, but all of those the music, I grew up with them, and I grew up playing all these slightly different styles, and when I go into Sebastian mode or Fates Warning mode, obviously depending on the song, depending on the band, there's different physical aspects. Where Fates Warning, if I broke it down physically, I would say Fates Warning involves more finger and hand technique, more a little more finesse, and those sort of things. Where a band like Sebastian, before going on the road with Sebastian, I'm playing harder. It's a more rock and roll sort of approach, hard rock, heavy rock approach. And then if I'm doing something like Halford, it's maybe somewhere in between, depending on, because the wider catalog of Judas Priest from early, Sin After Sin stuff, and Sad Wings of Destiny, all the way to the later kind of British Steel stuff with Dave Holland and that sort of drumming. So there's those different approaches, but I think just being a well-rounded player and playing music for so many years, I've never been I've never been like stuck in one distinct style. I've always kind of been influenced by all the different sort of genres of rock and, like I mentioned, even country music. So it comes out of my playing, and when I start working on the material, it's just another part of my drumming, who I am as a drummer, and it sort of just comes out that way, and I don't have to think about it so much.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny too, because I've always thought, and I'm not a drummer, so I could just be completely wrong here, but like I always thought that, in the end, the point of a drummer is to keep the rhythm and hold the rhythm and keep the beat and keep the structure. So I thought really, like, whether you're playing country or heavy metal or rock or whatever, that like in the end it all kind of boils down to like the same purpose.
Yes, it does. I mean, there are certain music. I mean, of course, time. Your tempo, time, and that is the major, purpose and the major job as a drummer is to keep time and to sort of give the band direction and make the music feel good or whatever, if you want to say that, and so that everybody can play on top of it. And that's why I think certain things, as I mentioned, like country music or something, it's all about time. It's all about the tempo of the song and the feel of the song. And a lot of times basic rock or whatever, radio rock is like that too. And so that is the main purpose. But at times, you can get out a little outside that if the music is more progressive, and there's a lot more creativity in some of the progressive music where you have no idea where it's going to go, and as opposed to maybe sometimes other styles of music that are a little more predictable, where it's going to be like, okay, here's a verse, and it's going to go either into a pre-chorus or it's going to go into a chorus. The music's going to lift a little bit, and it's going to go back down to the verse, and then it's going to be come down a little bit, and it follows that sort of structure. The cool thing about progressive music is you never know. You can go through one verse. You could start the song, and the song could be really heavy, and it starts right out with a guitar solo right up front, and then, it comes down to nothing, and then, builds back up, comes back down. There's a lot of different things that can happen in a progressive song, especially if a song is 10 minutes long, like a song, like the song Longest Shadow of the Day on the record, on the new record, where, that goes all over the place, and,
Yeah.
The Way Home, different songs on the new Fates Warning record where, you just never know on these progressive songs where the music's going to go.
Yeah. Well, that led me into my next question, because I've always thought that the term progressive music has been used quite a lot lately. Like, Pink Floyd or Yes is considered to be progressive. You guys are considered to be progressive. And then there's like a lot of like death metal bands or black metal bands that are even like being labeled in like a progressive category. In your eyes, like, what exactly do you think makes music progressive music?
I guess what I mentioned, not having that format of the structure of, verse, chorus, that sort of thing, pre-chorus, solo, back to the pre-chorus, chorus, double chorus out, that sort of thing. I think that that the music can go anywhere. As far as the death metal, I'm not in certain bands. I think maybe some people like to label their band as progressive because it sounds a little more adventurous, and like the band is going into different territories. I know that there was a lot of times, I think, when I hear power metal bands, especially like the European power metal bands, there's a lot of them are sort of kind of labeled as progressive bands, progressive power metal or whatever. But the other thing, and a lot of the bands, all the music is all in 4/4 time signature or whatever. And that's another thing about progressives, where there's multiple time signatures in the music, or tempo changes. These days, not too many bands do the crazy tempo changes like Rush did way back in the early days, where a song will start at 100 beats per minute, and then the next section will be at 135, and then the next section will go down to 120, and then it jumps back up to 170 or something. The tempo changes don't happen as much as they did in early, I would say, Yes and Rush, music. It seems like a lot more people these days, they're when they're writing progressive music, it's more involved with the different time signatures than it is. So it does have a pulse that's a constant pulse, but maybe it has a little twist where the music comes around instead of a measure of 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Maybe the next section will be 7, 8, and that section will be 7, 8, and then the next section will be, 5, 8, or whatever. I know I'm getting a little bit abstract here, but
no, I love this.
It seems like a lot of times progressive music is it's mainly the structure, the variances, and dynamics of how if a section is loud, a section is soft or quiet, a section is busy, or a section is really sparse, like say a Pink Floyd kind of thing, where it's really open, and then the time signatures. So there's a lot of things that a lot of components in progressive music, I guess.
Yeah, I've always thought that progressive music meant it relies less on structure, and it relies a lot less on repetition, and focuses a little bit more on evolution and experimentation, maybe like ending in a different way in which it started.
Sure.
Yep. And another question I wanted to ask you is, as a drummer, I've loved talking to drummers about this because, like, do you always need the music before you lay down your parts and you lay down the rhythm and the beat, or has there ever been a time where you had like a whole drum pattern or maybe like a whole arrangement written down on the drums and maybe the band would write over that?
When well, typically, I mean, if you talk to any drummer, and whether they know this or not, some drummers are more improvisational and some drummers are more structured in with their parts or whatever they're playing. And that being, if a drummer, you know, whether you're sitting in a situation where you're working with musicians and coming up with a song there on the spot, or whether you have a preconceived idea of what the song is and you're playing along with it, certain drummers will stick to, certain drummers that are more improvisational will stick to maybe a sort of a basic pattern of where the snare drum maybe is, but the kick pattern, the bass drum pattern will vary a little bit, maybe to some degree, but the fills, the drummer's fills will be totally improvised and just come up with something on the spot. And that's more of a drummer who's more improvisational to me, where there are drummers like myself where, to me, if I'm working on a song, if somebody sends me a song or whatever, I mean, obviously, if I'm playing on the spot, I'm coming up with something, you know, off the cuff or whatever. But if somebody sends me a song and I'm working on it or something, I tend to be very structured in my approach, and I'll map the song out. And I'll kind of figure out what fills I want to play and how I want to, where I want to put them, and the exact tom or the exact, you know, sticking configuration between, you know, the hands and the feet or the toms and the snare or whatever. I'll figure it all out, and I'll have it all planned out. I'll write it out, and then I'll record it that way. So I would say I'm mostly, you know, like I'm, you know, 100% or pretty close to 100% structured in my approach as a drummer, where some drummers will probably be maybe sort of like 50-50 or you know, 70-30 or whatever of how they put together their arrangement of the song based upon how much is improvised and how much is structured and planned out. So every drummer has that sort of in their playing. They sort of have that scope of very improvisational to completely structured. I like the structured approach because it makes sure that it's the same every time, and it's played that way, and everybody expects it that way, whether it's the other musicians or whether it's the audience. And that comes from sort of the Neil Peart from Rush thinking of a drummer and his role and the way the drummer approaches the music. There's a lot of drummers that have kind of, that are my sort of contemporaries, if you want to call them that, that have also been really influenced by Neil Peart, and that's why they play that way. And I think that's, I mean, if you look at a band like Dream Theater, that's the way that stuff was played. It was played sort of where everything is, the band plays the songs the same way, and it's very structured, and fans expect to hear it that way a lot of the time. You know, where there's some bands that are completely improvisational at points, like Mars Volta, or you know, I don't even know a lot of them, but there are bands out there like that.
Yeah, and look, we don't. I'm not talking crap by any means, but if somebody presents the music to you before any drums are laid down, how off time is it, or how off beat is it?
How off beat is it?
Yeah, like if somebody presents the music to you before there's any drums, is it very like out of time in a way?
Well, if somebody, I mean, that could be, you know, depending on if there's no drums there on a on a track. If somebody sends me a track and there's no drums yet, it's tough sometimes because if it's progressive music, I have no idea what the writer, the guitarist, or whatever is thinking when they come up with the certain riffs or whatever. I had no idea of what they're thinking. They're hearing from a drummer, and I could go a lot of different ways with that, and without sitting down with the person or talking about each section. It's pretty rare that I come across that. But usually, if that does happen, I have to talk with the guy and say, hey, what are you hearing? Do you hear this section at double time? Do you hear it at half time? Do you hear it common time? Are you hearing toms underneath it, like a tom-tom sort of thing? Or are you hearing it, really bassy? Or are you hearing a lot of double bass on this section? It could vary in so many different ways of what I choose to play. And I could come up with maybe 10 different parts for that same section that would be pretty much, very extremely different. But most of the time what guitar players or guys who give me a song, if I need to work on something, they do have a drum programming part that they send along with it. And at that time, I'm able to sort of listen to the part, hear what the guys, and hear what the guys wanting to hear from me playing drums on it. If they want me to, like as I mentioned, if they want me to play a lot of double bass on this section, if they want me to play something that's really sparse and really just heavy and sludgy, or if they want to hear something really, really busy, I'm able to kind of gauge by listening to the program, the drum programming that the guys do, and kind of go from there. Sometimes guys program really well. Sometimes guitar players can program really well, and sometimes it's nothing like what a drummer would play. I mean, it's just like out in left field. And at that point, I have to make sense of it. And obviously, I mean, there's some guitar players that don't understand what a drummer does. And it's kind of funny in a way, but but sometimes I deal with that if I get a demo from somebody and they want me to play drums on their song or whatever it might be. But I usually sort it out and go back and forth with the guy, and they'll listen to it and say, yeah, they like this part, they don't like this part, or it's all great, or like whatever. It varies.
Yeah. And before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this chat. Drummers are always like really great interviews. I'm really serious about that. It just obviously, obviously with the way the world is now, touring is not something that is going to be happening for the foreseeable future. But with the release of Long Day, Good Night coming out this November, is there anything with Fates Warning that you would like to promote, like maybe some live stream performances, some videos, or anything else that you would like to promote for the release of the new album?
Well, no, not particularly, but I would like to just say that I think there's going to be a couple more pre-release songs before the record actually comes out on November the 6th. And so hopefully people will listen to those songs. And when we started the interview and you mentioned something about if these two songs that have been released have been a clear representation of the record, I mean, listen to the whole record, listen to snippets of every song and check it out, because there's some really good stuff on this record. So I hope everybody can just kind of check it all out and listen to songs and dig into it a little bit, and maybe we'll have a chance to come out there and tour for this record in 2021 and be out there on the road and play some of these new songs live. Would be really cool.
And we definitely look forward to that. Thank you so much, Bobby. Everybody, we are here with Bobby of Fates Warning. Long Day, Good Night, out November 6th via Metal Blade Records. Be sure to pick it up then. Check out their newest singles right now. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.